It is the evening of October 27, 2022. A man walks into the San Francisco headquarters of Twitter carrying a kitchen sink. He is grinning. He films himself on his phone. He posts the video online with the caption, "Entering Twitter HQ, let that sink in." He thinks this is funny. Within the next 4 hours, Parag Agrawal, the CEO, is escorted out of the building. Ned Segal, the CFO, follows him. Vidya Gad, the head of policy and trust, the woman who had made some of the most consequential content moderation decisions in the history of social media, is gone by midnight. All three are fired for cause, a legal designation that strips them of severance packages worth a combined $88 million. The man with the kitchen sink is now in charge. His name is Elon Musk. He is, at this moment, the richest human being who has ever lived. He has just paid $44 billion for a social media company he claimed he didn't want to buy. The day before, he had promised Twitter's employees, in a company-wide message, that he had no plans to cut 75% of the workforce. By the following morning, half of Twitter's staff had lost their jobs. In the days that followed, the world debated whether Musk was a visionary or a reckless billionaire, whether Twitter was saved or destroyed, whether he was a genius or a fraud. But those who had worked closest to him, inside Tesla, inside SpaceX, inside the companies that made him the most powerful private individual in human history, were not debating any of that. They already knew the answer. But to understand what they knew, and why it took the world so long to see it, we have to go back to the beginning, to a lonely, bookish boy in Pretoria, South Africa, who learned the hardest possible lesson about survival before he ever learned about business. Elon Reeve Musk was born on June 28, 1971, in Pretoria, South Africa, to Errol Musk, an engineer, and May Musk, a model and dietitian. On paper, the family was comfortable. In reality, the household was something else entirely. Errol Musk was, by most accounts, including those of his own children, a difficult and at times cruel man. Elon has described his father as someone capable of almost every crime you can think of. He has spoken about his childhood in fragmented, carefully chosen words, but the picture that emerges across dozens of interviews and biographies is consistent. A home defined by emotional violence, by unpredictability, by a father whose approval was simultaneously craved and withheld. Musk was also severely bullied at school. Not moderately bullied, physically beaten, thrown down concrete stairs, hospitalized. He was a small, bookish child who had not yet grown into the forceful personality that would define his adult life. He spent long stretches alone, reading. He read encyclopedias. He read science fiction. He read the entire Encyclopedia Britannica by the age of 9, and then started on the fiction section. He consumed knowledge the way other children consumed cartoons, not because it was assigned, but because it was, for him, an escape from a world that was frequently terrifying. The people who know him best, the women who lived inside his private life, have spent years trying to articulate what that childhood produced. Justine Musk, his first wife, put it in terms that are almost unbearably precise. She observed that to survive what he survived, he had to make a fundamental psychological trade. He had to shut down fear. And she said, if you turn off fear, then maybe you have to turn off other things too, like joy or empathy. Grimes, the musician and mother of 3 of his children, reached the same conclusion from a different angle. She noted that he has an almost pathological aversion to contentment, that he cannot savor success, that he got conditioned, somewhere in that Pretoria household, to believe at a cellular level that life is pain, and that the moment you stop, the moment you allow yourself to feel satisfied, is the moment the pain returns. His second wife, Tallulah Riley, witnessed something that neither Justine nor Grimes described, but that perhaps explains both of them. During the most brutal periods of his business life, the nights when Tesla and SpaceX both teetered on the edge of collapse simultaneously, She watched him sleep. She watched him thrash. She heard him in his sleep reciting the things his father used to say to him. And she arrived at a conclusion she has since made public. Inside the man, there is still a child standing in front of his father. 3 women, 3 relationships spanning decades, 1 diagnosis delivered independently. Musk built his first company, Zip2, in the 1990s with his brother Kimball, sleeping in the office to save money on rent. He sold it to Compaq in 1999 for $307 million. He was 27 years old. He then co-founded what would become PayPal, was pushed out as CEO while on his honeymoon, and walked away with $180 million when eBay acquired it in 2002. By any normal standard, this is the story of extraordinary success. 2 companies, 2 exits, generational wealth before 30. Most people would stop. Most people would consider the question of what they were trying to prove to be answered. Musk did not stop. He took the entire $180 million from the PayPal sale and divided it between 2 companies he founded almost simultaneously, SpaceX, which he started because he wanted to colonize Mars, and Tesla, which he joined as chairman and early investor before eventually taking over as CEO. He also invested heavily in SolarCity, founded by his cousins. By 2008, he was nearly broke. SpaceX had failed 3 consecutive rocket launches. Tesla was hemorrhaging cash. He was going through a divorce. He was sleeping at the SpaceX factory. He told a friend he had enough money left for 1 more launch, and if it failed, everything was over. The 4th launch succeeded. And that is the version of the story the world knows. The man who bet everything and won. The man who built the electric car industry, the private space industry, and then bought the most influential social media platform on Earth. What the world knows considerably less about is what happened to the people who stood next to him while he did it. There is a pattern in the documented history of Elon Musk that does not appear in the authorized biography, does not appear in the TED Talks, and does not appear in the earnings calls. It appears in SEC filings, in court documents, in the accounts of former employees, and in the public record of his own statements set against the public record of his subsequent actions. The pattern is this: Musk makes promises, specifically and publicly, and then breaks them, specifically and verifiably, and then denies that he broke them. The most consequential example is also the most well-documented. On August 7, 2018, Musk tweeted from his personal account, with no prior board discussion and no regulatory consultation, that he was considering taking Tesla private at $420 per share. The tweet ended with 2 words that would eventually cost him in ways he did not anticipate: funding secured. The Securities and Exchange Commission investigated. What they found was that Musk had not discussed specific terms or prices with any financing partners. There was no funding. There was no agreement. There was no secured anything. The tweet was, in the SEC's determination, a material misrepresentation that moved Tesla's stock price and exposed retail investors to significant harm. The SEC charged him with securities fraud. Musk settled, paying $20 million personally, stepping down as Tesla chairman, and agreeing to have his future public statements about the company pre-approved by a Tesla attorney. This arrangement, which Musk openly despised, became known internally and in the press as the Twitter sitter. He subsequently violated it repeatedly. He continued to make public statements about Tesla without pre-approval. When the SEC pursued enforcement, he called the agency bastards in a public interview and referred to them as shameless puppets. A federal judge found him in contempt. He appealed. He lost. And then, years later, after the settlement, after the contempt finding, after the appeals, he told an interviewer that the funding had, in fact, been secured, that the SEC was wrong, that he had done nothing improper. The public record says otherwise. But funding secured is only one thread in a much longer pattern. In 2016, Musk promised that a Tesla would drive itself autonomously from Los Angeles to New York by the end of 2017. It did not happen. He promised Model 3 production would reach 5,000 units per week by the end of 2017. It did not. The production shortfall was so severe that Tesla entered what Musk himself called production hell, a period during which workers slept on the factory floor, safety shortcuts were documented by regulators, and injury rates at the Fremont facility ran significantly higher than industry averages. When the injury rates became public, Musk responded with a company-wide email. He said he wanted to personally meet with every injured worker. He said he would perform their exact task himself on the assembly line to understand what had gone wrong. Multiple injured workers later reported that he never contacted them. He never performed their tasks. The promise, like several others, evaporated in the space between the public statement and the private follow-through. The human architecture of Musk's companies has been described in remarkably consistent terms by people who worked inside them across different decades and different organizations. The terms that appear most frequently are not the ones that appear in the press releases. One former employee described the treatment of workers as being used like ammunition, deployed for a specific purpose until exhausted, and then discarded without ceremony or gratitude. Another described a culture of sudden dismissals, capricious decision-making, and apparently sociopathic indifference to the feelings of other people. A third described an environment where the only acceptable response to any demand, no matter how unreasonable, was compliance, and where the only acceptable outcome was success, no matter what it cost the people who produced it. This culture had a name inside some parts of his organization. Employees called it demon mode, the state Musk entered when a deadline was approaching or a crisis was emerging, in which normal human considerations ceased to apply, and the only thing that mattered was the mission. In demon mode, sleep was optional, families were optional, health was optional, the work was not optional. In 2021, Business Insider published an investigation reporting that Musk had exposed himself to a SpaceX flight attendant and propositioned her during a private flight. He allegedly offered her a horse in exchange for an erotic massage. The flight attendant, who had signed a non-disclosure agreement after receiving a $250,000 settlement, did not go on record. The reporting was based on a friend's account and documents. Musk denied the allegations publicly and personally, dismissing them as a political hit and tweeting Elongate, a juvenile reference to his own name and the word Watergate as his primary response to a credible report of sexual misconduct. Inside SpaceX, a group of employees decided they could not stay silent. 8 of them drafted an open letter addressed to SpaceX leadership. The letter asked the company to formally distance itself from Musk's public behavior and to take harassment allegations seriously. It was not a radical document. It did not demand his resignation. It asked, in measured corporate language, for basic accountability. Musk personally ordered their terminations. All 8 were fired. SpaceX President Gwynne Shotwell sent a company-wide email defending Musk and calling the letter a source of distraction. An HR director, when discussing the harassment allegations with colleagues, reportedly said of the flight attendant that she must not be hot enough to be believed. The 8 employees were gone within days. No disciplinary action was taken against anyone who had mocked the allegation. At Tesla, the pattern of dismissing dissent took a different form, but followed the same logic. When Musk referred to contractors on an earnings call as barnacles, small creatures that attach themselves to ships and slow them down, managers on the Fremont factory floor immediately began using the term to describe lower-paid contract workers. The word traveled from a billionaire's contempt on an investor call to a shop floor epithet within days. Black employees at Tesla's Fremont facility filed a series of lawsuits and regulatory complaints, documenting the use of racial slurs on the factory floor, nooses hung in bathrooms, and a management culture that treated complaints as nuisances rather than violations. In 2022, a jury awarded a former Tesla contract worker, Owen Dyers, over $3 million in compensatory and punitive damages after finding that Tesla had failed to address a racially hostile work environment. Tesla appealed. A subsequent ruling reduced the damages. The underlying findings of a hostile environment were not overturned. Musk's response to these findings in various public forums was to describe himself as a defender of free speech and to suggest that people in the modern workplace had become too sensitive. Mary Bate Brown had worked for Elon Musk for 12 years. She was his executive assistant, the person who managed the architecture of his professional life, who knew his schedule, his contacts, his preferences, his patterns. 12 years of loyalty to one of the most demanding employers on earth. In 2014, she asked for a raise. Musk told her to take 2 weeks off while he evaluated whether her role was actually necessary. When she returned, he told her that he had determined he did not need her. She was fired. 12 years, 2 weeks, gone. When the story became public, recounted in Ashlee Vance's 2015 biography, it became one of the most cited examples of Musk's management style. Not because it was the most dramatic, because it was so ordinary. Because it illustrated, without any embellishment, the fundamental transaction at the center of working for Elon Musk. You are useful until you are not, and when you are not, you are nothing. On October 26, 2022, the night before he took ownership of Twitter, Musk sent a message to Twitter employees. He wanted to reassure them. There had been reports, widely circulated, that he planned to cut 75% of the workforce immediately upon taking control. His message said this was not true. The following morning, October 28th, he walked into the building with the kitchen sink. By November 4th, approximately half of Twitter's 3,700 employees had been laid off. Many found out when their access badges stopped working. Others were informed by email at 3 in the morning. Some discovered they had been let go when they could no longer log into their work computers. The 3 executives fired on the first night, Agrawal, Segal, and Gad, had been terminated for cause. The for cause designation was significant. It meant they were not entitled to the severance packages negotiated in their employment contracts. Packages worth, in total, approximately $88 million. All 3 subsequently filed lawsuits arguing that the for cause terminations were pretextual legal language for the claim that the real reason for firing them was to avoid paying them, and that the cause designation was manufactured after the fact to justify it. The litigation was ongoing as of the time of this recording. Inside Twitter, what followed the mass layoffs was a period that employees described in terms more commonly associated with natural disasters than corporate transitions. Entire engineering teams were eliminated and then partially reconstituted when it became clear that the people fired had been responsible for keeping the platform operational. Some former employees were asked to return within days of being let go. Some declined. Some agreed under new terms. The institutional knowledge that had been discarded in the overnight purge turned out to be not as replaceable as Musk had assumed. He had also made, during the acquisition process, a specific promise about content moderation. He had said publicly, clearly, and on the record, that no major content decisions or account reinstatements would happen before a content moderation council with widely diverse viewpoints had been convened and consulted. Within weeks of taking over, he reinstated multiple high-profile banned accounts, including that of the former President of the United States, without convening any council. He subsequently disbanded Twitter's Trust and Safety Advisory Group entirely. When pressed on the Content Moderation Council promise, no satisfactory explanation for its abandonment was offered. There is a particular irony embedded in the story of Elon Musk's relationship with the institutions he despises. Between 2010 and the mid-2020s, Tesla, SpaceX, and SolarCity received a combined $4.9 billion in government subsidies, tax incentives, and contracts. The electric vehicle revolution that Tesla led was made possible in significant part by federal and state programs designed to accelerate the transition to sustainable energy. The SpaceX contracts that funded the company's early years came from NASA, a government agency. The solar energy tax credits that made SolarCity viable were written by government legislators. Elon Musk built his empire on public money. And then, as the empire grew large enough to feel self-sustaining, he pivoted. The SEC became shameless puppets and bastards. The NLRB, which had found Tesla guilty of multiple labor violations, including illegally firing union organizers, became an illegitimate institution. The Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, which existed to protect ordinary consumers from predatory financial practices, became a target for elimination. The California Public Health authorities, who ordered factories closed during a global pandemic that killed millions of people, became obstacles to be defied, and defied publicly, with Musk daring local officials to arrest him. None of them did. This is the detail that the story of Elon Musk ultimately turns on. Not whether he is a genius, the rockets reach orbit, the cars drive themselves, the satellites work. The question is not capability. The question is accountability. A federal judge found him in contempt of court. He appealed and lost. He continued to behave in the same way. The SEC charged him with securities fraud. He settled, violated the terms of the settlement, was pursued for contempt again, and continued to call the agency names in public interviews. The NLRB found Tesla guilty of labor violations. Tesla paid settlements and continued the same practices. The system that was supposed to apply the same rules to everyone, regardless of net worth, regardless of how many rockets you have launched or how many electric vehicles you have sold, did not apply the same rules to Elon Musk. And Musk, understanding this, pushed further than anyone had pushed before, further than the institutions seemed capable of stopping. Vivian Wilson is Elon Musk's daughter. In 2022, she filed a legal petition to change her name and her gender marker. In the petition, she stated that she no longer wished to be related to her biological father in any way. She said she did not have a relationship with him. She was 18 years old. Musk has 11 children by 3 women that are publicly acknowledged. His relationship with several of them is, by public record, strained or non-existent. The man who wants to colonize Mars, who has more biological children than almost any other billionaire in history, because he has spoken openly about his belief that humanity needs more people of high intelligence to reproduce. That man is estranged from the daughter who grew up in his house. The women who knew him most intimately, Justine Grimes, Tallulah, are not his enemies. They do not describe him as a monster. They describe him as a man who is still, in the places that matter most, a child in Pretoria. A child who learned that the only way to survive was to feel nothing, want everything, and trust no one. That child built Tesla. That child built SpaceX. That child bought Twitter and fired half the staff overnight and called it a business decision. It is both things simultaneously. That is what makes it complicated. That is what makes it a story worth telling. The executives Musk fired from Twitter, Agrawal, Segal, Gad, moved on. Agrawal joined a venture firm. The litigation over their severance continued through the courts. The $88 million remained, at the time of this recording, unresolved. The 8 SpaceX employees who wrote the open letter asking for basic accountability were absorbed into the labor market. Some found new positions. None returned to SpaceX. The flight attendant, whose allegations prompted the letter, remained bound by her non-disclosure agreement. Mary Bate Brown, the assistant of 12 years, has not spoken publicly about her firing. She gave 12 years of her professional life to one of the most demanding employers in the history of American business. She asked for a raise. She was told to take 2 weeks off. She came back and found out she no longer had a job. The people who were used like ammunition, in the words of the former employee who described them that way, rarely get their names in the story. The story is always about the man with the vision. The story is always about the rockets reaching orbit and the cars outselling everyone and the satellites providing internet access to people in war zones. Those things are real. The rockets do reach orbit. The satellites do work. The cars did change an industry. But the rockets were built by people who slept on the factory floor because they were afraid of what would happen if they went home. The cars were assembled by workers in a facility with documented injury rates and documented racial harassment and a management culture that described dissent as a distraction. The satellites were launched by a company that fired 8 employees for asking a question. The story of Elon Musk is not a story about whether he is good or bad. That is too simple a frame for someone this complicated. It is a story about what happens when a society decides that certain people are too important to be held to the same rules as everyone else. When the SEC backs down, when the courts are defied without consequence, when labor boards issue findings that are settled and then ignored, when the accumulation of enough wealth and enough ambition and enough rockets becomes, functionally, a form of immunity. Musk did not create that immunity alone. The institutions that were supposed to prevent it helped him build it, through deference, through delays, through a consistent pattern of treating his violations as exceptional cases rather than as symptoms of it had stopped applying its own rules. The child in Pretoria learned that if you push hard enough, you break through. He learned that from his father. He learned it from his school. He learned it from the companies that tried to take advantage of him and from the partners who tried to push him out. He took that lesson and applied it to every institution he ever encountered. And so far, the institutions have proven him right.